Hi, I'm Dave Halsing. I am the Executive Project Manager for the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. Thank you all for coming. It's been a while since we've done one of these stakeholder forum events, but we're glad to be doing it again and glad to welcome you here. We are going to do a round of introductions of our project team and of the forum members, and we'll run through the agenda and everything. But before we do that, just, we've all been doing web conferencing for, it's only been about 20 months, but it seems like much longer. But still, there's some logistics and things that our colleagues at CCP are going to go over in terms of Zoom logistics and things. So I will pause here and share my screen, and then we'll walk through those, and then we'll come back for introductions.
Oh, hi everyone. This is Ariel Ambrewster with Sac State Center. Excuse me, I was going to give us the old name. The Consensus and Collaboration Program is our new name. So I will quickly go through a Zoom orientation for those of you who aren't constantly on Zoom like we are. So if you would like to mute and unmute yourselves, that's in the lower left-hand corner of your screen if you're on a computer. And if you're on the phone, you would dial *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Next slide, please. So the video toggle to toggle yourself visible and invisible is right next to the microphone, and we love to see your faces, and we also want you to stay comfortable, and so feel free to do what you want with your video. Next slide. So we will be, typically we're in the room, we can see hands. In this case, if you can virtually raise your hand, that will start a queue and we can call on folks in order. So to do that, you would click on the happy face reactions button down at the bottom of your screen, and then you can click on raise hand. And if you're on the phone, you would dial *9 and you'll hear a little recording saying you've raised your hand. Next slide, please. So the chat is there. Please feel free to ask questions or add comments through the chat, and we love to hear your thoughts. We will integrate them in to the extent that we're able to. Next slide. So you can contact me via text. I think text is ideal if you're having any technical problems, and that's 510-356-7432 for those of you on the phone. If you're in the Zoom, you can chat me and we're happy to support you. And just a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. We'll be holding breakouts separately later on. Those will not be recorded. Okay, next slide. Back to you, Dave.
Back to me. So I already introduced myself. I'm Dave Halsing, but I am privileged enough to work with a number of excellent partner organizations on the restoration project. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves in turn. We'll start with the State Coastal Conservancy.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Cholodenko. I'm a project manager at the Coastal Conservancy. For those of you who don't know, the Conservancy is helping to coordinate this large landscape scale restoration project. We also do a lot of fundraising and fund management for various aspects of the project, including planning and science and construction. There's several staff at the Conservancy who work on the project, including myself. I think a lot of you out there probably know Brenda Buxton, who's been the lead staff person for the Conservancy on the project for many, many years. Unfortunately for us, Brenda has decided to retire. So this is going to be her last South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project meeting. And we're fortunate to have her here today to provide some updates and answer questions. And I'm going to pass it over to her to make a few more introductions.
Thanks, Laura. As she said, I am retired now. So this is my volunteer. I'm a volunteer or alumni. I don't know quite what to call it. But I want to let you all know who is taking over some of the things I worked on. Of course, Laura will be the lead on a lot of the phase 2 projects. And my colleague, Evan Sloan, will be taking over as the Deputy Bay Program Manager and will be the lead on Shoreline. And she will be working with Shalini Kannan, who you will hear from later, who's going to be the interim contact for Shoreline while Evan is still on leave. And we'll continue to work with Evan on Shoreline issues. Shalini is the lead for ecotone design for the Shoreline project. So I think if you have any questions, you can contact any one of those three folks and they should be able to answer your questions. And you're a great group to work with, and I will miss you all and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Brenda, and all from the Conservancy. Let's go to CDFW and the lone John Kraus.
Right. Let me make sure my video is coming on. I've got a little bit of a slow connection here. Thank you. All right. Hi, my name is John Kraus. I'm the Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor for the Bay Delta region. That's a new role for me as of June 1. Prior to that, I was the unit biologist for Marin, Contra Costa, and Alameda County, and have been managing Eden Landing for the past 20 years. So until I've got a replacement hired, I'll still be directly involved in all aspects of the project. And then as I hire, backfilling my position, there'll be a new person involved in management of Eden Landing, but I will be involved in the South Bay Salt Ponds as the supervisor, nonetheless, into the long-term future. So thanks very much. Look forward to continuing to work with all you folks, and welcome to the new folks that we haven't worked with directly yet.
Thanks, John. And Matt Brown will introduce himself and his colleagues at the National Wildlife Refuge.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Brown. I'm the complex manager for the San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge Complex, which is the 7 national wildlife refuges throughout the San Francisco Bay area. Prior to that, I was the refuge manager at Don Edwards, San Francisco Bay. So intimately familiar and love working on the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. We'll be learning more about that in a little bit. And I would like to introduce first Rachel and then Chris from our team as well.
Rachel Curtis, I'm the wildlife biologist here at the Don Edwards Refuge. Thanks.
Hi, and my name is Chris Barr. I'm the Deputy Complex Manager for the San Francisco Bay Refuge Complex. I have 29 years of experience on recovery and restoration projects in California here, and been here at this part of our complex for the last 6 years. So I directly supervise each of our wildlife refuge managers and supporting our leadership team. So glad to see so many faces here today.
And thanks, Judy, Valley Water.
Good afternoon. This is Judy Nam. I'm the Valley Water Liaison for the South Bay Salt Pond Project. And I'm also the project manager for the Calabasas Santa Masikino Creek Marsh Connection Project. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Jeo Han, who is the assistant project manager. Jeo Han, who is the assistant project manager. I'm sorry, I'm hearing a bit of an echo. Apologize.
Yes, I'm trying to mute folks. If folks can mute themselves until it's their time to speak, that'd be wonderful.
And also Nick Mascarello, the project planner. Sarah Guidret, she's the project biologist. And Tony Mercado, our PIO for the project. And I thought our Valley Water Board of Director, Dick Santos, was joining us, but I don't see his name on the participant list.
He's here.
Oh, he is. Okay. So welcome. Yeah, that's it.
That's great. Thanks. And Donna.
Hi, I'm Donna Ball. I'm the lead scientist for the project. I work 50% time on the project and 50% time as a senior scientist at SFEI, and I'm glad to be here.
And our fabulous colleagues at Ducks Unlimited.
Hi, I'm Renee Spence, and I am a regional biologist overseeing San Francisco Bay and California coast, joined here by a few colleagues. First off, Natalie Washburn, if you could say hello. Natalie is my fellow biologist on this effort.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I don't have my video on, but I'm Natalie Washburn. I'm a regional biologist with the San Francisco Bay team for Ducks Unlimited.
And Colin Dudley is one of our engineers leading some planning as well as implementation. Planning at Eden Landing, implementation at Island Ponds and Ravenswood. Colin, if you'd like to say hello, that would be great.
Hello, happy to be working on this project.
And I didn't see them here yet, but feel free to speak up. Should be joined shortly by Steve Carroll, who leads our engineering team, and possibly also Taylor Lancelot, one of our engineers leading the Mountain View efforts.
Hello, everybody. This is Steve Carroll, engineer at Ducks Unlimited. Colin won't be making it today.
You mean Taylor? Taylor.
Taylor, yep.
Okay.
Sorry, Colin's
That's
here.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. And I do see that Neil Hedgecock from the Army Corps of Engineers is here. Neil is on our PMT and also heads up. Yep, go ahead, Neil. PMT and also heads up. Yep, go ahead, Neil. Yep.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Sorry if there's a bit of a lag with the video and the audio. I think I'm going to try to get back in to see if that corrects. So yeah, I'm the project manager for the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline project. We're really excited to be moving forward with physical construction on that coming up pretty soon here, and glad to be here today.
Well, thanks everyone for that. I wanted to take a couple extra minutes up front. You know, almost everybody. I wanted to take a couple of. You just heard from is either new to the project or new in their role, and we haven't met with the stakeholder forum in a few years, and so we wanted you to sort of see our faces, hear our voices, and know what our roles were. We also have updated our forum roster quite a bit, and I'm hoping that those of you who are on the forum membership and are here can take yourselves off camera and just quickly say your name and wave and introduce yourself. Probably easiest if I call on you by organization first. If there's I'll give it a few seconds for people to unmute and then move on to the next one. I don't know if Mary Lou or anyone else, Derek Farmer from City of Union City is here.
Yeah, Mary Lou Ayupon, Public Works Director for the City of Union City. And we're excited about this project on the fringe of our city and how we best connect to the Bay Trail system. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Lou. And Jennifer Brown from City of San Jose. Anyone from NASA?
Hi, Jennifer Vacola Brown from City of San Jose and representing the regional wastewater facility. Nice to meet you.
That's great. Thanks, Jennifer. Anyone from NASA?
Hi, Jacqueline Satir. I'm representing the NASA Environmental Management Group.
I'm glad you could join us, Jacqueline. Thanks. Bay Planning Coalition. All right. Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. Do we have anyone?
I am, it's Eileen McLaughlin.
There you are.
Yeah. With Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge, and just very interested in where we are and where we're going at this point.
And Eileen, was Arthur here as well?
Yes. It's going to be.
Hi.
There he is.
And I noticed we had Florence with us as well, too. Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, there's quite a few of us here, and Karen, hi also. So Arthur Feinstein with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge.
And Karen, go ahead.
Hi, I can't get my video to work.
That's okay.
Glad to be here, and I think you've won, Dave. It's over 100 now.
All right. And I skipped over the Sierra Club, Loma and Prieta chapter, but I think I saw Gita on here.
Yes, this is Gita Dev with the Loma Prieta chapter. Really looking forward to being back on this team here and to the where we are going now. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much. City of Sunnyvale, I think Melody's here. Yeah.
Good afternoon, City of Sunnyvale, Melody Tovar. Good to see everybody.
And Bay Trail. I don't know if Lee made it.
I am here. Hi, Dave. Thanks for introducing me. I'm Lee Huo with the Bay Trail program at ABAG/MTC.
That's great. I'm glad you could make it. I do know Ralph Johnson's here.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, this is Ralph Johnson. I'm retired from the Alameda County Flood Control District, and I'm glad to see Brenda is joining the retired ranks. So I'm no longer associated with the Flood Control District, and I don't think they're particularly interested in the restoration project anymore. I am associated with the East Bay Discharges Authority in Ora Loma and have been somewhat involved in the Ora Loma levee project. So it's interesting to see how we can proceed on the restoration project here.
I'm glad you could make it, Ralph. Thanks. Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society.
Yes, hello, this is Matthew from Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Glad to be here. This is my first meeting with this group, so looking forward to it.
Well, that's great. Thanks so much. I thought I saw Shani on here, but
I'm here too. Thank
okay.
you. This is Shani Kleinhaus, working with Matthew at the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Thank you.
That's great. Anyone from SFPUC?
Hi, this is Jane Lavelle from SFPUC.
Great. Thanks for being here, Jane. I think I saw David Lewis. No? Okay. David, if you're on, or if anyone else from Save the Bay is on, just jump
Sorry.
in. Oh, there
Yeah,
you are. Yeah.
thanks. We're here, and thanks for pulling this together. Always great to get these updates.
Great. Glad you could be it. And PG&E?
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Armstrong. I am the PG&E representative. I'm filling in for Mariano Mandler, but I am the PG&E HCP administrator.
That's great. Thanks. Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. All right. The retired Ann Moorkill.
Hi, I guess I'm a citizen at large now. Ann Moorkill, I retired from the Fish and Wildlife Service in 2020, and I was on the PMT on this fabulous team for just almost 8 years. So it's great to see a lot of familiar faces, and for the new faces, this is an amazing project to be a part of. So congratulations, and I look forward to catching up on all the news.
And Cargill Salt.
Hi, this is Connie Lee, representing Cargill Salt, and looking forward to hearing more about the project.
That's great. Recreational Boaters of California. Okay, we already said hello to Richard Santos from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Richard, feel free to, wave and say hello if you want, but if not, we can move right on, whatever you like.
Well, thank you, Dave, for the introduction, and good to see everybody. Every day, I'm very thankful for Senator Feinstein's vision way back when I was appointed. I also want to take the time to say to Brenda Boxer from the Coastal Conservancy, congratulations on your retirement and well-deserved.
City of Mountain View.
Good afternoon. This is Raymond Wong at the City of Mountain View. I'm excited to be on this call. Looking forward to the update and the good discussion. We also have Lisa Au, our Assistant Public Works Director, on the call as well from the City of Mountain View.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa.
I'm glad you guys could be here. That's terrific. I think I saw Charles Taylor from the Alviso Water Collaborative.
Yes, I'm here. It's again, echo the sentiment. It's very good to see everyone again. And again, being a resident and an activist in Alviso, we're passionately interested in what occurs with this project. It's good to see everyone.
All right. Mid-Penn Open Space District.
Hi, I'm Jane Mark, Planning Manager with Peninsula Regional Open Space. I'm new to this stakeholder group. I think prior we had our Mid-Penn biologists probably join some of these conversations, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for filling in. East Bay Regional Parks.
John Holder, Senior Planner with the East Bay Regional Parks District. Happy to be here. It's my first meeting, but looking forward to seeing what it's all about.
All right, thanks. And I do see Corrine is here too from Mid-Penn. If you want to say hi, Corrine.
Hi, Dave. Sorry, I couldn't jump on faster.
That's okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining Jane here today, and got a couple of folks here at Mid-Penn who are interested in the project and trying to integrate our property however possible. Good to see you all.
All right, we're almost done. We've got the vector control districts, and I think Brian is here, and I don't know if Erica is, but.
Erica will join us later, but yep, Brian Weber, San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control.
Appreciate you guys being here, Brian.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I'm here too. Sorry, I just joined. I was getting out of another meeting, but now I'm here.
Perfect timing. Perfect timing as always, Erica. And last but certainly not least, the Port of Redwood City.
Hi, Dave. Thank you. Christine Zortman with the Port of Redwood City. My first time here, delighted to be here. And We always have Bay sediment for any beneficial reuse project that anyone's interested in.
That's great. Thanks, Christine. Yeah, we really do have a lot of new forum members, and I have tried to sort of keep the new members posted on sort of what the goal of these forum meetings is and how it all works. The big thing is that we want to give you updates on what we're doing, but we also want you to hear each other's questions and comments on things. And we're trying not to make this just 2 hours of talking at you. We do have a fair bit to get through, and we're gonna try to leave some time for questions and clarifications as we go. But the big things are to remind you that we do have breakout sessions at the end that we'll tell you about, where we can really dig in more detail if we're running short on time or if it's a very detailed question. And so with that in mind, I do see, I'm sorry, a few other people popping up in the chat. I didn't realize we had other members on our roster, but Marshall from the Sequoia Audubon Society is here. Diane Howard, Mayor of Redwood City. I'm honored that you could be here. Thank you so much. And Margaret and probably others from San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority are here too. Thanks. We will, if you are interested in being, added to the formal membership roster of the Stakeholder Forum, please do let me know. We try to keep that updated, but things move fast. So things do.
Dave, you've got a hand up too.
Oh, whose hand is up? There it is. James McGrath.
I hope I'm not the oldest person in the room, but I am one of the original stakeholder meetings. And I got the coolest job. I got to convince the Port of Oakland to let me go to these meetings under the hope that there might eventually be a place to put dredge material or mitigation measures. And I got to vote to approve these projects at both BCDC and the regional board. So I'm just really thankful for what you do. And also, for those that haven't done as much public processes as I have, this has been a model, and they've done it right. So I just don't want to escape without getting the stakeholders at the table is maybe the most important thing to do in California to develop a project. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that vote of support, Jim. That is going to make me calm down just a little bit. So thanks. I always get a little adrenaline rush on these kinds of things. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to move into some slides. I'm going to let me get that going first here before I start talking. It should be this one. All right, so here you are. We've done introductions, and this is our agenda for today. I'm going to very quickly give you an update on kind of the restoration project as a whole, mainly for those who are new. Matt Brown's going to talk about the phase 2 work that's either underway or coming up very soon at the National Wildlife Refuge. We'll have a short break, and then John Kraus will update everyone on Eden Landing and what's going on there. Donna Ball will talk about where we are in our science program and our priorities for monitoring and applied studies in the coming years. And then we have some time set aside for some of our collaborations with other outside projects. We'll give you a quick little, look at what we're doing in the immediate future, and then we'll get into the breakout rooms. We'll tell you more about those shortly. I want to remind everyone that, we are going to have this optional open house at the end where, if for some reason we don't get to your question, if times are tight, if you're shy and you want to have a smaller conversation, I have cleared my schedule for the rest of the day and the evening, and I can stay on as long as we want to answer whatever questions or follow-up concerns or issues you have. So that is my plan. So please feel free to hang out as long as you like. But here's what we're doing with the restoration project overview. We really have 3 main goals, right? Habitat restoration, flood protection, and public access and recreation, right? And there's some caveats here on these things, right? We mostly want to do tidal marsh, but we do have to keep some managed ponds and enhanced managed ponds for pond-dependent wildlife. We have to increase or maintain the current levels of flood risk management, but with the caveat, we are not doing true flood levees, such as those that would be built by the Army Corps of Engineers or certified by FEMA. And all the public access that we do has to be wildlife compatible. And so, there's this balance, and you'll hear it talked about again and again today, between the kinds of habitat restoration we do, balancing the needs of different special status species and the kinds of environments they need, Flood risk management, of course, is partly coastal flooding and partly fluvial flooding, and that interface is challenging and difficult, and will is a point of sort of constant tweaking and adjusting, and just going to get worse with sea level rise. Wherever we can, we try to do that in combination with local flood protection agencies, districts, public works agencies, things like that. And then public access and recreation, low impact public access features to make sure that they are wildlife compatible. Trails, viewing platforms, we did do one kayak launch and things like that. So those are our goals, and where we implement those are at 3 different pond complexes. Everything in the blue is the state of California's Eden Landing Ecological Reserve. That is managed by John Kraus, who will talk about that shortly. Everything in the green in 2 different locations. Here is the Ravenswood Pond Complex, and everything in green down here in the South Bay is the Alviso complex. Of course, the community of Alviso is smaller and in one place, and so we tend to talk about Alviso as being, these areas here, and we refer to these ponds over here as the Mountain View ponds, for example, but they are all technically part of the Alviso Pond Complex. But because these 15,000 acres are so large and so spread out, this project's being implemented in a number of phases over a few decades. That work began in 2003 when the ponds were acquired from Cargill. A combination of public and private funding for those, state and federal funding, and also, of course, a meaningful donation from the Cargill company. And that was, over 15,000 acres in the South Bay. These are our project partners down here, the 2 landowners, the state and federal landowner. The Conservancy is the main funder, and Cargill and others have been important partners all along the way. The other reason why the project is being implemented in phases is the importance of understanding that we have trade-offs to make all along the way between how much restoration to do versus flood protection, how much public access to add without undermining wildlife. But the biggest one we face is the trade-off between tidal marsh and pond-dependent species. And the way that my predecessors, I always say we, but it was really people like Ralph and others who were around at the beginning, who thought about the ways to balance those, to make incremental progress towards the restoration over time and see how things were doing. And so they envisioned this sort of simple graph over time with the amount of the total project area that was restored to tidal marsh. And so the idea was that they would get at least to 50-50, 50% tidal marsh, 50% managed ponds. And that at the high end, we might get as high as 90% tidal marsh. But that really, we would very likely end up somewhere in the middle of those. We would implement a phase, see how the wildlife responded, see how things established, and adjust as needed from there and make decisions about how much more do we do. And so phase 1 was implemented in a number of locations all around the Bay. We're going to provide these slides to you later, so I'm not going to read all of these right now, but a number of different areas were enhanced as ponds, others were restored to marsh, several miles of trail were added, different viewing platforms, and the kayak launch that I mentioned earlier. That led to 3,000 acres of tidal and muted tidal restoration and over 700 acres of enhanced managed ponds. And there's some really nice photos here of some of those outcomes. In some of the earliest parts of the marsh restoration that we've done, the marsh is already established, and special status marsh dependent species are already moving in and making use of those habitats in less than a decade. We also added 7 miles of new trails, and these are some of our public access features here. I really like this Compass Rose. If you haven't been out to that in Northern Eden Landing, it's a very pleasant walk. And at the end of phase 1, we're somewhere around 25-30% of the total area of the project has been restored to tidal marsh. The phase 2 work that you're going to hear about in just a moment will get us just shy of 50%. Haven't done the math in a while, but it'll be 45-48%, somewhere in there. And then where we go after that, well, that's going to depend on how well phase 2 works for all these different kinds of things, and what all of the different science that we have going on can tell us about sea level rise and different things like that. These are our phase 2 project sites, and shortly you're going to hear from somebody more mellifluous than I to talk about first about these 4 different areas in the National Wildlife Refuge. And then after the break, John will talk about the Eden Landing portion of it. So I will stop there and turn it over to Matt Brown from the National Wildlife Refuge, who is going to talk us through what's going on there. Take it away, Matt. I'll advance the slides when you tell me.
Okay, thank you, Dave. And thank you to everyone for participating in the forum today. Just to echo what Mr. McGrath said, that real strength of this project is the collaboration and the community support that this project has behind it. And none of the success and nothing that we're talking about today would have occurred without that support. So we're going to kind of spin around the clock today. We'll start at 3 o'clock and work our way around to 9 o'clock and talk about the various activities that are taking place in the 4 different locations on Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, where phase 2 work is taking place. We are going to hold questions. We'll have about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of this presentation for a few short questions or points of clarification. And then, as Dave mentioned, if you have a more in-depth discussion that you'd like to participate in, we can do that at the end of the forum in that session. So we'll zoom in on Alviso and the island ponds. And, Dave mentioned some of the early success and where we're seeing the tidal marsh species coming back. And so these 3 ponds of the island ponds were in phase 1. Some of the first breaches of the project occurred here on the island ponds, and in the ponds closest to the bay, so A21 and A20 on the left side of this image, we have seen extraordinary recovery of the tidal marsh. It's really beautiful out there, and the species are returning. A19, which is on the right side of the image here, furthest from the bay and also the largest of the 3 ponds, has been slower in its recovery. It is getting vegetation, sedimentation is occurring, but it's much slower in that pond. And so you can see in the image here, every place where there's a new green arrow, that symbol is a breach. So we are right now in the middle of prepping the work. It's going to take place in the next month or 2. We will put in some breaches along Mud Slough to hopefully bring in an additional flow of water, additional sedimentation into pond A19. And we're also lowering some of the levees, some of the old levees from salt production that are out there, increasing the connectivity, hopefully between A19 and A20, and increasing that sedimentation rate to sort of catch A19 up in terms of marsh recovery. So we know it works well. We're just sort of augmenting and building on the success of phase 1 at this site. I think we can go on to the next slide for some images. And you can just definitely see A21 at the top, A19 at the bottom. And so we're just doing a little more of what we know works in order to catch that up. We can keep going. So as we keep moving around, here we are much closer to Alviso. You can actually see the community of Alviso in this image. This is what we now call the Pond A8 complex. At the start of all of this, this was a pond complex of multiple ponds. And now, just through wind fetch and natural processes, all of the internal levees are gone. And so it's just one big pond, which we commonly refer to as the A8 pond. But here it has been, tidal action has been introduced into this pond, and we are building ecotones or habitat transition zones on the 2 southern corners of this pond. I think Dave is going to flip ahead and we can see what that means. Also, another name for these is horizontal levee. So these ecotones, these 30-to-1 slopes that head out into the pond, are designed to give both habitat and the species in the habitat opportunities to migrate, either with an individual tide cycle to move up and down and sort of, instead of just having a seawall, you have this slope, or as sea levels rise, a more gradual both temporal and spatial migration back as the ponds raise. Another benefit of this is that it protects infrastructure behind our restoration efforts. At Pond A8, there is an old historic landfill there. At many of our locations, there are historic landfills adjacent to the bay where we're working. And so it serves multiple benefits there. And we'll be talking more. There were 2 ecotones. We leave a gap in the middle specifically for some future restoration actions, and Valley Water is going to be talking about that later in the forum. So I think we could probably go to the next one. So as we continue to move around the clock, here we are at, I don't know, I want to keep carrying the 6:30, 6:45, who knows what time. So here in Mountain View, we have multiple components that we've been talking about in the other 2 project sites lining up here. So you can see on the southern end of these ponds that are adjacent to Shoreline Park and Shoreline Amphitheater, we are building those ecotones, those horizontal levees to protect landfills that are behind there and the recreational features that are behind there in the city of Mountain View. So those ecotones, and provide that ecological benefit of habitat migration. Here we are also going in and putting in breaches to introduce tidal flow into these ponds to start that restoration effort, recognizing the need of a suite of multiple species. We're also building islands in these ponds in order to provide nesting habitat and foraging habitat for a variety of waterfowl species. And then what really sets this pond apart from island ponds is that there's a real public use component here. On the east side of the ponds here, and Dave can show it, where we put in those breaches, we do not want to isolate those pieces of land. So we're actually going to build bridges there. We're going to have wildlife viewing points out there in an effort to, sort of share the work that we're doing that you have all supported for so long, to be able to share that work with the public. So we'll add, linear feet of trail out there and, give people the opportunity to watch this occur firsthand. Island ponds is an amazing story, but it's very difficult to get to, and most people will never see it. This, people will watch it restore. And speaking of that, so some of the things we're talking about, we have City of Mountain View participating today. The partnerships are the key here. And so if we're going to be successful in our conservation work, we've got to all be moving in the same direction. So, we've been working really closely with the City of Mountain View, making sure that they're comfortable with both the final outcome, making sure that the hydrodynamics of those breach ponds isn't a threat to their landfills, but then also that as we're building these features, that we take into account the recreational use and the citizens of Mountain View and the businesses of Mountain View. And so, we've been working for years with Raymond and other folks in the city of Mountain View, but we, because of the complexity, you saw that map, there's a lot of pieces there. We're kind of going in phases, even in this one pond location. So we're going to go on the far eastern pond A1, start that work. We believe we will be moving dirt next year into pond A1. And as we're building that side, we're going to continue to work with the city of Mountain View on the pond A2W side. There's more infrastructure on that side, more flood mitigation pieces that we have to deal with. And so there's additional planning and work that will still take place on the A2W side. Or wait, I got that backwards. A2W first, A1 next. All right. And then last but not least, as we come around the clock, this is Ravenswood. This is exciting stuff. This is sort of, if you're going to do restoration, it's all happening right here. Everything we've talked about getting to this point is occurring. So in terms of, just to talk about it. So there are 3 pond systems that we are restoring to different places. So R4, that pond system that is closest to the bay, that we are going to restore to tidal marsh. We are building horizontal levees to protect the landfill that is Bedwell Bayfront Park. We are building up some of the internal levees to provide segregation of these various ponds so that we can have different ecological and visitor use goals. So R4, when we're finished, will be restored to tidal marsh. R3, which is south of that, in between R4 and what is now Meta, So R3 is going to be maintained as plover habitat. So that will be dry, salt pan, mud flat for plovers. So as Dave mentioned, we're trying to balance the needs of multiple species. So we'll have that here. One of the ponds is going to be tidal marsh. One of the ponds is going to be plover habitat. And then on the western side of this complex, you've got the R5 S5 pond complex, and that will actually be managed for waterfowl. So that's going to be a pond. The water will circulate through, and we will manage that for waterfowl. There are other components to this pond system. If you have been anywhere near along Highway 84 there, you've seen for several years we've been importing fill and doing some construction work. And in the last 6 months, it's really ramped up there. The R5 S5 pond system is being used in partnership with the Bayfront Atherton Canal Flood Control Project. So it will serve as the emergency reservoir if there's a catastrophic flooding event. It can be used as a catchment basin to protect the communities behind it in Mountain View. And this is also going to be an enormous opportunity for public engagement and to help the public understand. There's a half-mile trail that's going in that will take you to a central piece where you can stand in one spot and you can look out at a tidal marsh being recovered. You can look back and you can see a salt flat where plovers are, and you can see a managed pond. And then you can see upland features in Bedwell Bayfront Park. What's particularly exciting for the Fish and Wildlife Service as well is that we have a partnership. The South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project has a partnership with Facebook. Facebook, if you've been on that highway, you've seen, has recently built a pedestrian bridge over Highway 84. So, Highway 84, this massive multi-lane highway, was a barrier for people from East Palo Alto, from Bellhaven, some underserved, non-traditional audiences that haven't, even though they're, as the crow flies, pretty close to the refuge and to the restoration effort, they have not been able to access it or enjoy the work that we're doing. And so combination of the Facebook bridge that connects those communities, working with those communities to identify other barriers, we can increase not only the number of visitors that come to the refuge and the restoration sites, but also the diversity and the type of visitors that we're welcoming. So pretty excited about everything that's happening at Ravenswood. Water control features are going to be installed this year. Here you can see pictures. You can see with the pictures of the soil import that's coming in. And then we've even started, will be this fall, if you go to the next picture, we'll start doing some of the vegetation work along those horizontal levees. So we'll be doing that, and some of the bullets we've been talking about. We're going to be outplanting this winter. We've been bringing in fill agreements, City of Menlo Park, Cargill, the Bayfront Atherton Canal we've talked about. So lots happening. There's that outplanting effort. Save the Bay has been an incredible partner in this effort. Their greenhouse, not their greenhouse, but they're growing planters out there where they've been growing native plants that will go out into those ecotones and just accelerate the restoration that is going to occur. So I think that was a quick spin around a lot that's going on.
And this is just the main part of the schedule here that Matt already talked about. And I don't know if there are we kind of work through material import and placement and grading. Next year, we'll finish the earthwork, do the trails and public access features. We'll do the tidal channel excavation, and then we always end with the breach. So, So I don't know if there are questions on that. We have about 15 minutes actually that we can use for Q&A on any of the, or discussion or points of issue on any of the phase 2 actions at the refuge. I don't know if anyone has anything in the chat.
Yes, feel free if you want to add your questions, comments, thoughts in the chat, but also feel free to raise your virtual hand and Dave will call on you in order.
I'll just turn off the screen share so we can see each other better. If somebody needs to refer to a map or anything, we can always put that back up.
Yeah. And I see from Luke Bailey in the chat then, do you have plans for Pond 812 near Alviso Marina County Park?
That is a great question. So what we've been talking about in the forum is the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, which touches parts of Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge. There are other parts of the refuge that haven't yet been included in phase 1 or phase 2 of the restoration project. And A12 is one of those ponds. If you've been out there, you know there's a lot going on in and around A12 right now. There is a kickoff meeting this Friday, actually, for the Shoreline Project, the South San Francisco Bay Shoreline Project. And so there's gonna be a lot of years of work. That is an actual, and I know Neil's on the phone, so if you want to say more about Shoreline, you can certainly jump in, but that is an Army Corps of Engineer flood control levee that is designed to protect the community of Alviso. So that'll be going in. And as part of that work, once that levee is completed, there'll be ecotone put in there, and there is a plan to ultimately breach and restore Pond A12. That's not part of the restoration project, but that work will be taking place.
Well said, Matt.
All right, I got it like 80% right, so Neil's gonna let me have a pass on that one. I'll take it.
Nice.
And I just see Gita Debs got her hand raised too. You want to go ahead, Gita?
Oops, sorry, I tried to put my question in the chat, but I'm not a very fast typer. I was curious about the public access that's being proposed from, off Shoreline Park along, I think it's Pond A2W, sort of going north and then crossing a couple of bridges across the bridges. I was concerned as to whether there might not be some downsides on that. I mean, Shoreline Park does have wonderful access, but what I've been hearing from some individuals who walk along, because we've been very concerned about Moffett Park development, so we've been sort of following that and the ponds there, that the people who are walking between some of the ponds, it's really causing disturbance to the wildlife and to the nesting, and some of the nests are being abandoned. So I was just wondering why we absolutely need to do that. And Sierra Club is extremely interested in public access always as a way of just getting the public to buy into restoration. So it's odd for me to question that, but I am questioning it.
It's a very appropriate question, Gita, and I'll go back to I was part of the project team that worked on developing the phase 2 alternatives and analyzing them in the EIR EIS that we did some years ago. And in response to that concern, in particular at that location, it's a half-mile trail that is going to go up on the edge of a pond that is over 400 acres. And so we're going to, there's some islands shown on that GIS map that we showed you. Those are not necessarily the locations of the islands. We're going to try to build those more on the north and western side of the pond to keep them away from the trail. And the other thing that's going on, we pulled the trail back and we're shortening it a little earlier. So it's going to get to the bay, but it's not going to run along the northern edge of that pond. And the other thing that I'll note that we said is that we will actively monitor wildlife use in the ponds, and that trail will allow for seasonal closures during nesting season if it appears that the wildlife are being disturbed by those. So the refuge is going to actively monitor that, or we'll work with our project partners at SFPBO or whomever, right, to monitor the wildlife and try to adjust as appropriate and do seasonal closures of that trail during the sensitive period. So that was seen to be the kind of compromise that we need to try to make, right, to sort of meet all of the different goals of the project.
I appreciate that, and I think it'd be really great if we posted signs there which said, don't drive your electric scooter along here.
Yeah.
So forth, and just have gates so that in fact, if things aren't working out, we can close them.
that is in fact in the design plans. There are gates that will be not locked unless unless we need to for seasonal closures. And that approach has worked really well in Northern Eden Landing, right, where there is a year-round section of trail, and then there's a seasonal loop trail that closes during nesting season. So we get pretty good compliance with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see Eileen's hand up, and then I don't want to miss the questions in the chat. So Eileen, why don't you go first, and then we'll loop back to a couple of the chat.
Yeah, I think this should be pretty easy for you. In looking at the map of the Mountain View site, I was noticing at the mouth of the Permanente Creek, which has this nice marsh kind of tucked in between its, in an alcove in the landfill, and it looks like you're connecting that, or plan is to connect it with a 2W. Is that right?
We are not currently planning that connection. We are, however, stopping the construction of the transition zone in that pond. A1, the transition zone goes all the way across the southern border of the ponds. But on the A2W side, where at each corner, in fact, there are existing sort of very muted tidal marshes with limited culverted connections. We're stopping the transition zone short of those so that in the future, we have the option, and the city of Mountain View has the option. Those other areas are actually city of Mountain View property. We could have the option of making those connections at a future time and a future phase of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's why we picked it. Let's see here. We got Corey Overton about PG&E and the power lines, submarining the power lines. That is, we meet with PG&E pretty regularly, Corey, about a number of different aspects of the project. To my recollection, we've never talked about undergrounding there. I think it would be really difficult to do that in under an existing wildlife refuge and an aquatic one like this. I don't know if that's impossible, but I don't think anyone has talked about it. I'm going to stop there unless there's more follow-up on that. Marshall, I don't know. Marshall, do you want me to read your question, or do you want to jump in and read it yourself? Either
I'd be happy to ask it. My question is, with all the attempts to build along the various areas like near Bedwell and some of the others, what are the main challenges of the desire of local jurisdictions to build there to raise their tax base versus the restoration?
Yeah, that is a piece of the world that I have very little control over, almost none, in fact. Yeah, I mean, we try to have a lot of active and positive discussions with our neighboring cities about things that we can do together that are mutually beneficial. I can't, and I don't think the refuge or CDFW or our project funders have any ability to direct the cities on what they choose to do with development there. I don't know if any of my colleagues want to weigh in on that, but that's my sense of it. I'm hearing none.
Are there areas that the public could beneficially participate in to help with the restoration as opposed to more commercial building there?
Yeah, well, of course, like all citizens, right? You can write letters to your elected or appointed officials. You can participate in city planning meetings or county planning meetings. There are advocacy organizations that several of them are on our web conference today, right? Save the Bay Citizens Committee, Audubon. There are others, and so you are, of course, free to avail yourself of those opportunities as well. Yeah.
I would just add to that, Dave, is that the state's planning effort for 30 by 30 and on the federal side, the America the Beautiful, those are continuing to move forward in separate planning efforts. And that was another way that community members can get engaged and have a voice on areas that they might see as being beneficial for addressing sea level rise or increasing recreation or habitat improvements for wildlife.
Yeah, that's a good add, Chris. Thanks. Appreciate it. I don't see any other hands raised or any other questions in the chat. If if there are others, now's a good time. If not, maybe we will start our 15-minute break just a couple minutes early. Oh, Corey's doing something, reroute the transmission. Corey, maybe just if you're comfortable, explain what you're. It's not interesting to listen to me read. So if you feel like explaining that yourself, go for it.
I have a bit of a noisy household here, but I'll try and do
okay.
it while there's a break. But yeah, it was the context was PG&E was doing some foundation work up near China Camp a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and in discussions as I was just out there with the folks, that idea came up, and it was the first time I had ever heard of it. So they would run cables underwater, which is actually beneficial. It keeps the lines from overheating. And so it wouldn't actually be burying through tidal marsh, which of course will never happen, but would keep things offshore. And because there's enough creeks and avenues to potentially do that, I just wanted to know the downside was they were talking about doing that because of wildfire risk and risk to the actual lines themselves in the North Bay, because that transmission line in there is sole provider. There's no other avenue. So they were thinking about doing that because of risk of energy shutoff, but it was expensive. And so if they already have the infrastructure in place, they're going to try and keep it. But if there's a push to do something like that, they won't come up with that idea themselves, I guess is what I'm saying. So I don't know how expensive it is, but it might be a idea worth discussing with them.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I see Chris's hand up, and Tim Armstrong. I don't know if you have any insight into whether or not PG&E is considered such things, but I don't mean to put you on the spot, but we are.
No, it's okay. The one thing I will say is that we have just recently re-engaged with our engineering group after a very busy fire season. Mariano, who's I'm filling in for, has recently re-engaged with them, and I think that this is kind of coming up. So I just don't know if undergrounding or laying cable or raising the towers is what they're looking at.
That's great. Thanks, Tim. And Chris, go ahead. Yeah.
Just to add to that is that the National Wildlife Refuge meets, fairly regularly with the different divisions of PG&E on some of their upcoming maintenance projects and future planning, and so, we continue to stay engaged with them on areas where they need to, replace towers and where they are in their planning process for those all across the Bay and the different parts of the refuge that might impact. And we very much value their role, and it's good to have you on the stakeholder forum here today. And we're continuing our discussions on how we move forward together in partnership, because they do value themselves a partner on the South Bay Salt Pond project, and how do we move forward with some of the complicated work in the towers that go across the Mountain View ponds. So we're continuing to work on that as we work with the city of Mountain View and their questions on our designs and our approach.
All right, thanks. Well, it's 2:00, and I want to make sure that we give everyone a moment to stand up and stretch your legs, get some coffee, whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here at 2:15. Thanks again. And if there's something we didn't get to in this, we are going to have separate breakout rooms for the Ravenswood part of the project, the Alviso part of the project, and the science part of the project, as well as the Eden Landing part, which we haven't talked about yet. So there will be ample opportunity to dig in on anything we didn't get to. So so thanks again, and we'll see you in a few minutes. 2:15.
No, I'm just on the forum as Arthur's alternate for Citizens Committee.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks. All right. Well, hi everyone. Welcome back. We'll get started. Yeah, thank you. I see a couple people being listed here as potential new members to the stakeholder forum. Kit Sue from Alameda County Water District, Ross and Greg from Friends of Stevens Creek Trail. Margaret, you and I spoke about adding the San Francisco Creek JPA, I'll certainly do that. So yeah, I think Ariel's going to capture the chat, and so we'll at least have your names and organizations. I may need to reach out to you after for some of you to get your contact information and phone numbers and things like that. So
could I just, we should have, because people had to register, we should have your names and your email addresses. What we may not have is your affiliation. So if you would, anybody who would love to just add that to the chat, then we can track that. That would be super helpful.
Excellent point. Excellent point, as always. All right, I'm going to reshare the screen, and I am going to get everything ready here. John Kraus is here, and we're going to start with the Eden Landing update. So if everyone is seeing the, I really like this laser pointer function here. There's Ben Pearl from SFBBO. This was a nice plover habitat enhancement volunteer effort we did early this year in Eden Landing. So John, I think you are good to go. You can take it away.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for your time this afternoon. Catch you up about Eden Landing. Go ahead, Dave. So just a point of orientation, right? So overall, Eden Landing, just south of Highway 92, the tidelands north of the Cowdy Hills and the flood control channel on Alameda Creek flood control channel. The phase 2 at Eden Landing is basically everything between Old Alameda Creek and north of the flood control channel, as Dave's pointing around there. So we've got some pond designations listed on here just for planning purposes as much as anything else, and describe what's happening out there. So the bay ponds are the greenish looking ponds. That's ponds 1, 2, 7, and 4. Those are the ponds planned for tidal marsh restoration in stage 2, or phase 2, so to speak, stage A. There's the inland ponds there to the pinkish color there and a little bit orange. That's ponds 6, 5, and 6C. And then as you go south of there, the southern ponds, which are ponds 2C, 1C, 4C, and 5C. Then, of course, right where Dave's cursor is there is the Alameda Creek flood control channel. So on the north end of that border is the old Alameda Creek channel. Go ahead, Dave. All right, so this is kind of a detailed look at the phase 2 Eden Landing preferred alternative. So it includes all actions planned. We are going to stage phase 2 into stages, stage A and stage B. Just briefly to point out some of the main features, as I mentioned, the bay ponds 1, 2, 7, and 4 are going to be restored to tidal marsh with a main breach on Old Alameda Creek, and some other levee lowering features, some smaller breaches where we're moving water control structures there to the west of on Pond 1. And then following out towards the bayfront there, there is a large transition zone planned along the bayfront of Pond 2 and the inboard portion there of Pond 1. We've got some little features sticking out there on that Pond 2 bayfront. Those are large sort of rock and wood groin features. The idea is to try and further protect the bayfront and try and soften that hard bayfront edge, which is all riprap at this point, to try and collect natural accreting material. There are a lot of gravel, beach, and berm type features within the existing marsh to the north there on the Whale's Tail, and so we're trying to sort of jumpstart that a bit. We will have a small pilot project on that bayfront levee on Pond 2, which is going to be a gravel beach and berm pilot project, which is about 300 feet long, that we'll actually be constructing. And the idea there is to use that as a pilot project and determine if a more direct intervention on creating those things is feasible and performs well. And so that's kind of the main features of the tidal restoration in phase 2 there on those main bay ponds. As we go inland towards those inland ponds, again, that's 6 and 5 and 6C. Those are going to be retained in the near term as managed ponds. So we've got some new water control structures and some refurbishment of some other water control structures going on in there. Where Dave's cursor is there at Pond 6 is the new intake. that'll be constructed, and that's because currently the intake in Southern Eden Landing is at Pond 1. And so since those are going to be direct managed ponds, we need a direct intake and discharge ability there at Pond 6. There will be additional ancillary water control structures that are new from Pond 6 and 5, and then from the tidal area in Pond 7 that's restored to full tidal action to Pond 5. And then there are 2 water control structures currently existing between Pond 5 and Pond 6C that will be, maintained or improved, so to speak, replaced as needed, but likely we'll be able to use the existing operating pond-to-pond connections there. The nuance with Pond 6C is that we will retain that as a managed pond for the long term. We're going to be using that as a snowy plover management area. We've had some snowy plover activity in that pond in particular, and with the improvements with managed pond enhancements in phase 2, we intend to be able to operate that more directly. Right now, it's sort of incidental because of the pond operations are subject to the limitations of the existing infrastructure. And so water flow is really pretty limited there as far as draining down those ponds and making them suitable for plover habitat earlier in the season. So we will have that ability to operate more directly as we implement phase 2. Going down into the southern ponds, still the main connection for operating those ponds is on Pond 2C at the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel. We'll maintain operations there. You see a blue looking finger that goes through there. That's a starter channel, so to speak, or a channel that will be able to more actively drain and fill the ponds in the 2C system. So that's 4C and 5C and 1C. So those are some of the main near-term improvements to water control structures there between Pond 1C and 5C, for example. The pond operations, I think, and restoration activities I kind of covered there. I want to just get back to some of the other features, public access in particular. So with phase 2 at Eden Landing, we're going to continue the Bay Trail from that northern dark purple line there from the existing Bay Trail spine, which at this point goes east into the Eden Shores development. And we'll continue that then down south and towards the east, and then down south again along Pond 6A, crossing the old Alameda Creek channel. Right now it's shown on the existing 20 tide gate structure, as it's called, which is a flood control operated and maintained facility. Bringing the Bay Trail spine then down to the Vesey Street area. We intend to have a community connector there to the existing streets on Vesey Street and Horner Street, those of you familiar with the area. And then continuing the Bay Trail down along the east side of Pond 6 and 5 and 6C. At that point there will be a small pedestrian bridge, so to speak, that will be crossing. There's a small flood control channel facility there that runs along what are called the J ponds. That's how they currently use stormwater detention and use their facilities to the east of us. And in the J ponds, it's labeled there for their flood detention for waters that are coming off of the Hayward watershed area. And so the Bay Trail spine would cross that bridge and then head down along essentially the northern levee of Pond 4C, 5C, and around Pond 1C, and then connect to the flood control channel at the existing Alameda Creek Regional Trail that's there. The nuance here for the staging in phase 2 is that anything that directly is connected to the Alameda Creek flood control channel is going to require a separate approval process from the Army Corps of Engineers and the local flood control district, Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District. And so where you see the connection, which the one that's there just where Dave's cursor is, would be a culverted water control structure, and that would allow tidal waters and connections into Pond E4 as part of the tidal restoration. And then to the west of there would be a full breach, which would be bridged on the Alameda Creek Regional Trail. And that would be another connection directly to Ponds 2 and Ponds 4 with a channel connection from the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel. And those are largely for fish habitat and connectivity issues with respect to connecting to the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel which, separate of our project is, there are a lot of efforts underway for restoration of anadromous fish run for steelhead down there. The other feature that's shown here on the map, the kind of box that sticks out over the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel, that is the bridge that was included in our environmental report, the environmental impact report for a connection from the flood control channel north side to the south side, such that other partners would be able to undertake that endeavor on their properties and potentially provide that connection to the south. That's not directly part of our project, but the environmental review is completed as part of our project. So there's a lot of details there. The other features I just want to point out are the mid-complex levee. So there's the one that Dave was tracing there is the division between the tidal restoration to the west and the bay ponds and the managed ponds on the eastern side. So we will be constructing that transition zone to some degree, but largely it's just going to be a large earthen berm on the existing alignment that's out there to protect and otherwise maintain the integrity between the tidal marsh restoration area and the managed ponds in the inland ponds. That's it for that slide. So in total, what we just discussed was about 1,635 acres of tidal marsh for the bay ponds, another 765 acres of those managed ponds. That's 5, 6, and 6C. The muted tidal restoration that's listed here, the 450 acres, that would be for the stage B connections to the flood control channel via the 2C pond and in 1C, 5C, and 4C. Of course, all these activities are considering the flood risk management implications. And so, our intent is to maintain or improve the flood risk management with respect to this project and those adjacent facilities that are operated and owned by the Alameda County Flood Control District. So we include some upland transitional habitat along the bay side of those managed ponds, the bay ponds, and of course on the bayfront levee, as I was mentioning, large transition zone that would be constructed on the inboard side. And then as part of some of those other improvements that we mentioned along the J ponds and south of Pond 6C, we will be providing some water control capacity for the flood control district to have more direct management. So I mentioned the public access by including that Bay Trail spine along the north and eastern portion and through into southern Eden Landing is about 4 miles long. We'll be constructing that, the design standards for the Bay Trail. So that's a 12-foot wide top levee with some shoulders on either side, some ADA compliant surfacing, so graveling. So they'll be drivable, of course, for maintenance and safety, public safety access needs. Again, there's that community connection trail coming off of the Bay Trail spine, off of VZ Street into Union City. Of course, along the trail, we're going to have some viewing areas, some benches, interpretive signs, as well as some regulatory and information signs, particularly at the trailhead, so to speak, locations, the entrances to the reserve, and then along within the trail along the way. The bridge over the stormwater channel that was mentioned there was along the trail, not the large bridge over the flood control channel. That's not directly part of our project as far as what's being designed and to be constructed. So retaining all other public access features in the north, the ongoing waterfowl hunt program, and otherwise. So again, it's a staged implementation. So most of what you had seen in that slide, and we're going to have a couple of slides after this to talk about those nuances in between stage A and stage B, but I did kind of cover those in detail just now. So stage A design and permitting is underway. We're at 60% designs are almost through completion. We've been getting review from Alameda County Flood Control and ongoing input from them, working with all of our partners. Most permit applications are submitted. We're working on the last couple here. So we expect that we'll have permits issued in 2022. And then hopefully by late summer or early fall 2022, begin construction. One other thing I'll mention while we're on this stage A slide, we have been doing some levee maintenance in Eden Landing, Southern Eden Landing in particular, throughout the reserve, Southern Eden Landing. So we've been importing clean material from off-site and using that to maintain the existing levees throughout the system in Eden Landing, largely around Pond 6 and 5, 6C, and then Pond 7 and 4. But also some ongoing work that's happening as part of that on the Bayfront levee. There's a levee repair that needs to be done. That's going to be happening hopefully here in the next few weeks, where we've had some scour on that levee. So the stage B differences that I was mentioning before are all those things that are directly connected to the Alameda Creek flood control channel. And that requires what's part of what's called a Section 408 process. So literally, it's going to take an act of Congress, but we have largely the support of the Alameda County Flood Control District. We're working with them on some of these details so that we can actually breach to the west on that circle that's there. We would provide a bridge over so that the trail is maintained. And there will be a viewing area there, of course, some interpretive signs, things like that. As we go to that middle, more oblong circle, again, that's the culverted connection underneath the flood control channel, so that we can provide tidal flows in and out all the way across the J ponds there into, that's the county property there, into Pond 4. And then again, some water control structure internal there, so they would have the ability to drain the J ponds into that channel. Currently, they have to allow all that either water to flow into the ground or to be pumped all the way towards the north out of their existing Alvarado pump station. As part of stage B, just go back real quick, Dave.
Sorry.
The 2C pond connection that's currently there, a couple of 48-inch culverts, we would be improving and enlarging that water control structure such that we would have muted tidal flows in and out. So that would be similar to what we've got in the far northern part of Eden Landing and a portion of the old Bomberg tract, where we've got about 300 acres of muted tidal marsh. So that would be the improvement that's directly on the flood control channel there. Otherwise, those the rest of those improvements, the channel and the culvert connection, so to speak, between 2C and 5C would be part of it. So these are a couple of shots here of Eden Landing. So on the picture on the left, just to get some perspective, that's Pond 6C on the right portion of that left photo where Dave's cursor was, with the kind of orange hued water there. And the dry pond bottom, you can see that would be the snowy plover habitat management area. Of course, we'd be managing them for shorebirds in the spring and fall migration, overwintering waterfowl likely. So multi-season, multi-species benefits from retaining that managed pond. I just mentioned the J ponds. This is the dike marsh essentially to the left side of that photo. And that's the Alameda County Flood Control Facility there. And then just off in the distant background there, are ponds 5 and 6C, and then you see some of the berms and levees in between, and that far kind of northwestern view there is Pond 7. And so on that left side photo there, that's looking southbound essentially over the C ponds. So as we call them, the southern ponds in our introduction here. The big pond in the foreground is Pond 5C. So the ones that are off to the right there would be 1C. So Cal Hill is the hill that you see visible with some trees there, with a levee connection there. To the left of that is Pond 3C, which is currently still owned by Cargill. Same with Cal Hill. And then off into the distance there, you see the Coyote Hills. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of Eden Landing in those photos. And thanks again to Chris Benton. These are fantastic kite aerial photography that we have. So hopefully I'm doing well on time, and we've got some questions from any forum members. I know there's been a lot of chat in there. I'm not sure if those are questions directly related to that or other things, but
John, I can offer one quick one from Karen High. Was wondering what actions would be taken to protect snowy plovers from terrestrial predators and domestic pets.
Sure. So domestic pets aren't allowed at Eden Landing, right? So we don't have access for people walking dogs or dogs off leash on the Bay Trail, for example. We do have an ongoing predator management program in Eden Landing that we would continue.
And then just quickly, so in terms of when breaching in E1 and E2 is going to occur, I think you were saying construction would start in 2022. Is that right?
That's right. That's the goal. And we would expect to have at least probably 2 years of construction. So I wouldn't expect that we'd be ready to breach Southern Eden Landing's Bay Ponds, and that's 1, 2, 7, and 4. And again, that's largely through Old Alameda Creek at Pond 1 and 7, not directly on the bayfront of 2. That would be expected somewhere in the neighborhood of 2024 optimistically, and maybe 2025.
Great, thanks.
All right. Thanks to everyone for your questions in the chat and elsewhere. We're a little over time, so I'm going to ask that we hold the rest of these discussions. I haven't even really read them all yet. Hold them until we can get into the breakout rooms. I want to make sure that we sort of keep everybody's time on track here. So the next thing we're going to do is have Donna Ball give us the science program update. So Donna, I will share my screen and advance your slides for you.
Great, thank you. Watching here.
Does everybody know Donna? I'm sure everybody knows Donna by now.
So you can go, there we go. So let's start with that slide.
Yep.
Yeah, so this is going to be a really high level, fast fly through of what we're thinking for the phase 2 science. I'll talk a little bit about how we're trying to build on the phase 1 science and go over some of the documents that we prepared over this past year or two.
Donna, before you start, I think Dave said, does everybody know Donna? And I mean, people, since we haven't had a stakeholder forum meeting since 2017, you are our new lead scientist. So we do want to introduce you in a little bit. You might want to talk briefly about your background.
Sure. Yeah, I've been associated with the project for, well, I guess probably over 15 years. I worked at H.T. Harvey and Associates while the development of the programmatic EIR happened, and have huge familiarity with the big table. Many of you know of that. And then I worked for H.T. Harvey for about 7 years, and after that went on to be the Habitat Restoration Director at Save the Bay. And I just joined the project almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago, and work part-time, as I mentioned earlier, at SFEI, and then part-time on this project. Is that good? So yeah, I also want to make sure that I let you know that this is a high-level talk today, and so we will be planning a science symposium next spring. And so you'll have an opportunity in the spring to really dig deeper into the science, we hope. And then I also want to talk a little bit, as I'm talking about everything today, about some of our efforts to collaborate on the science in a regional manner. Next slide. At the end of phase 1, Laura Volpe prepared a really great summary, and the project really looked at all the various uncertainties in the project and using the stoplight system. And so what we really wanted to do was try to build on that. I'll just share a couple of these. We thought a lot about the bird use of ponds, and we're looking at particularly terns, avocets, and stilts as areas where we still had concerns, especially thinking about predators and California gulls. And in snowy plovers, we thought we were doing pretty well, but I'll share some of our thoughts about that going forward. Next slide. Sediment and sea level rise were also concerns and uncertainties as we started the project, and I'll be sharing a little bit more about where we are on that. Next slide. So we took that stoplight and the summary that Laura Volpe did and really wanted to think more about our phase 2 science going forward. We had a gap in personnel and science staff, and even now, since then, we've had some COVID gaps. We really wanted to poll kind of the scientific community and get some outside help on looking at our next phase of science. So we contracted with Point Blue Conservation Science to help us think about the science going forward. And as part of that work, we convened a whole set of scientific stakeholders, most of the scientists in the Bay Area that have had a connection with the project, and met to really talk about what we learned from phase 1 and what we think we still needed to know in phase 2. And as part of that work, they developed this phase 2 science synthesis, and as well as a climate synthesis, looking more in depth about the effects of climate on the project and what the project might do to address some of those effects. And then particularly looking at new technologies and thinking about how we might collaborate on a more regional level There isn't going to be enough money for all of us to do all our work, and we don't want to duplicate work. So how can we think about ways to work together? Particularly thinking about adaptation and resilience in terms of sea level rise and climate change. So all of those documents together are helping us in developing our ongoing science program for the project. And we're developing an internal document, a science plan that will help us think about not only the science that we're going to do, but how we're going to fund the project and what our strategies for prioritizing the projects will be. Next slide. So as we develop the case, that framework that as part of that effort to really look at phase 2 science, we developed this way to really prioritize all of the science, look at conceptual models and logic models, and see what rises to the top. And as we developed the framework document, these 4 uncertainties rose to the top: mercury and water quality, snowy plovers, breeding water birds, and sediment. And so while we're doing a lot of other science on the project, we really are putting a big focus on these 4 particular areas. And so I'm going to walk through a little bit of what we've learned and what we're looking for in terms of monitoring and science going forward with respect to these 4 topics. Next slide. So in particular, thinking about sediment at the end of phase 1, and as we started phase 1, we really were wondering as the project began whether we would have enough sediment and whether sediment would create enough to provide for marsh development. And secondarily, thinking about adjacent habitats. Would that sediment going onto the marshes be robbed from other habitats nearby, like mudflats and marshes? Looking forward to phase 2, I think that's still a question that we have. Do we have enough sediment going forward, thinking in terms of sea level rise and climate change? And a lot of studies are coming out that say that we may not, and yet we are still experiencing accretion and marsh establishment at some of our sites. So learning more about the sediment sources and the availability of sediment will help us think about that staircase that Dave showed earlier, and how far we might progress along that staircase in terms of marsh establishment. Next slide. So for phase 2, we're really looking at continuing the habitat evolution mapping that Brian Fulfrost has been doing, and looking closely at marsh establishment and whether or not we're seeing gains or losses in any of those areas. And we're also interested in doing sediment accretion studies at the complexes that Ravenswood, Albiso, and Eden Landing. One of the really exciting things that we've been doing in all areas is, as I mentioned before, is this idea of looking for opportunities for collaboration. So Dave and I regularly attend many of the meetings with partners, and in particular, we attend a lot of the RMP meetings. And so we've identified an opportunity to partner with the sediment work group in the RMP and SFEI to help contribute to their lower South Bay sediment flux study. And that will help inform some of our questions about accretion and movement of sediment near our project site. Karen Thorne, who's on the call today, and Jesse Lacey are also doing a study through the sediment work group of the RMP to look at the movement of sediment from shoals and onto marshes. And so that work is being conducted near Whale's Tail, and it will also help inform some of our work at Eden. So next slide. I just want to share a couple. Brian Fulfrost is also on the call today, and so I just want to share just a couple slides to think about this idea of, is there enough sediment right now and maybe into the future? And this is from some preliminary work that they've done and will be completed over the next year. And this is actually available on our website. Next slide. So just showing, we know that we have really good marsh establishment at Pond A21. I also want to show these slides from Brian's work of Pond A6, and the pond 2011 A6 was establishing a little bit of tidal marsh, but when we look at 2019, based on his work, we're really seeing a lot of marsh establishment. So, back to that uncertainty of whether or not marshes will establish, we're still seeing that happen in the South Bay. Next slide. And the second part of that question, is that marsh establishment having an effect on adjacent mudflats? And at least as far as this mapping goes at this point in time, it doesn't appear so. This is from Ogilvie Island, which is really close to Pond A6. And we can still see marsh establishment occurring and vegetation establishing. Next slide. So waterbirds, the uncertainty around whether or not we can maintain habitat value and carrying capacity for waterbirds remains an uncertainty for the project. We are seeing A number of birds that are doing really well, and yet we are seeing some birds that the conversion of managed ponds to mud or to tidal marshes may be having an effect on those. Some work by USGS, Josh Ackerman and his lab suggests that in recent publications. Can we manage the ponds and reconfigure some of the ponds with islands and shapes that will actually help those birds establish? Looking at phase 2, those are still concerns I think that we have and things that we want to study. We also want to be sure to look at the effects of predation and some indication right now of flyway trends due to climate change and changes in temperatures. And it'd be good if we can find a way over phase 2 to really evaluate those. Next slide. So phase 2 studies, Josh Ackerman and his lab will be doing breeding waterbird surveys in 2022. A lot of this work that we have, especially around the waterbird surveys for all the species, was impacted by COVID and the ability of staff to be able to get out into the marsh. So we're really hoping to get some of these studies established next year so that we can look at the effects right as they're happening. So breeding waterbird surveys from USGS next year. Migrating waterbirds surveys will be done by SFBBOs this fall, winter, and next spring. And that it also includes studies to look at phalaropes. In particular, we've seen, we learned over the past year that we needed to adjust our timing to really understand the phalarope migration. And so we've adjusted some of the survey timing, and that's provided us with some a better sense of what the population is doing. One of the interesting things we, SFBBO participated in this past year was a range-wide study comparing the data from San Francisco Bay with data that where phalaropes also move within the range, and found similar declines over the past year. So they're continuing that work, and it'll be interesting to learn how what's happening in the range compares to what we are seeing. Something really exciting is there's an effort to really develop a set of Modus towers along a gradient in California, and to really be able to track what's happening with some of the birds. It requires the birds being banded, but so that also takes money to establish the towers and to also band the birds. But one tower is being installed at Eden Landing and towers in the South Bay. So it should provide additional information for us that'll be really helpful.
Donna, can you briefly say what a Modus tower is?
Well, it's a tower that can actually be installed somewhere at height in the marsh or on the top of a building. And it can detect, if you band birds, you can actually detect the movement of those birds electronically. So next slide. Snowy plover, well, you know, we mentioned, I showed the slide where we had a green at the end of phase 1. We still think the plovers are doing okay, but we're not increasing the population to the numbers that we'd hope to meet some of the project goals. And so maintaining the diversity and abundance and contributing to the recovery goal are still, I wouldn't say they're uncertain, but we still need to determine the best ways to help accomplish that. One of the things we're really interested in is predation, and the effects of predation seems to be having a fairly strong effect on the ability of the birds to actually fledge. So looking at that and also in terms of habitat enhancements, what we can continue to do to provide habitat for these birds as they're breeding. And regional habitat availability, you know, a lot of where the birds are nesting is within the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project footprint. And so trying to identify other areas where these birds might be able to where other places these birds could utilize. Next slide. So phase 2 studies for the snowy plover, SFBBO is continuing to do breeding surveys. They've stepped up their efforts to band these birds, which allows us to better track and as well as determine how many birds are surviving to fledge. We've embarked on with SFBBO and UC Berkeley on a study to look at the effects of predators on birds and what types of management in the past has been effective, and also what other types of habitat enhancements might help either the birds survive and breed on the site, as well as maybe minimize the effects of predation. Next slide. I think there's only one or two more. Water quality, you know, when we first started the project, we were really concerned about the effects of breaching high saline ponds and what those effects might be in terms of affecting receiving waters, and seem to have gotten a pretty good handle on how to manage ponds. There's still concern going forward about possibly the effects of increased temperatures due to climate change and what that might do to pond waters, adjacent pond waters, particularly in sloughs, as maybe these ponds heat up, and also what the effects of maybe algal composition and the effects on receiving waters. Next slide. So we're continuing to do water quality monitoring near restored ponds, combining that with some fish monitoring. The refuge and CDFW are continuing to do ongoing operations and maintenance monitoring. And then we're looking at regional collaboration opportunities, particularly with SFEI, who maintains a nutrient management strategy moored sensor monitoring network in the South Bay. And we've been talking with them about possible opportunities of trying to answer some of our questions, as well as combine it with the work that they're already doing. Next slide. So that was a very, very quick rush through, trying to make up a little bit of time. I do encourage everyone to come to the breakout session. I'll be hosting it with Laura Cholodenko to help us really answer a lot more of your questions that we probably aren't going to get to right now. And if any of the scientists I've made a whole list of you that are on the call. If you'd like to join us in that science section, that would be great too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for making up a little bit of time, Donna. We are still a little bit behind schedule. I'm sorry about the lack of time for questions here, but in just a little bit, we're actually going to have a time to dig in deeper on your questions. So let's hold the questions for now, and let's just save them for the breakout groups. We're going to,
great. And I'll make a note of what they are. I'll look at them in the chat here. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're going to give a few minutes to Brenda and Shalini to talk about the South Bay Shoreline Project, and then we will hear briefly from Judy Nam on a very important upcoming project we're just getting started on with the Santa Clara Valley Water District. This is one of my all-time favorite pictures. I love this shot. So Brenda is going to start with the South Bay Shoreline Project, which is here. Brenda, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So now that I am retired, I am no longer the official shoreline study project contact person, but I did want to reintroduce my colleague, Shalini Kannan, that I have been working with on the shoreline project for a couple of years. And so as I said, she'll be the person to contact for the month of November and then in December moving forward, it will be Evan Sloan as the main shoreline lead. But Shalini's been working on it for quite a while and is working on ecotone design. And I will let Shalini give the presentation and she can answer any questions she has. And then I can heckle her from the cheap seats over here.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everyone. I'm Shalini Kannan with the State Coastal Conservancy, and I'm here to give you a brief overview and update on the Shoreline Project, which is a collaboration between the Conservancy, Santa Clara Valley Water District, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The Shoreline Project geographically overlaps with the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project in the far South Bay, as you can see in the red circle on this map. One of the unique constraints of working in this area is that the adjacent community of Alviso, which is part of San Jose, is deeply subsided because of historic groundwater pumping, making the community highly vulnerable to coastal flooding and sea level rise. The Conservancy and Valley Water became involved in the Shoreline Project as a result of the South Bay Salt Pond Project. Next slide, please, Dave. Years ago, the Conservancy and Valley Water became joint non-federal sponsors and embarked on a feasibility study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to figure out how we could restore the salt ponds while also protecting the community of Alviso. That study was completed in 2015. Next slide. As a refresher, because many of you have heard about this project, the Shoreline Project proposes to construct approximately 4 miles of levee, shown here in red on the map. The levee would tie into existing flood protection projects on the Guadalupe River and Coyote Creek. The ponds that will eventually be open to the tide are shown here in blue. Next slide. The project also includes construction of an ecotone, which is a vegetated buffer area between the tidal marsh and uplands that will provide refuge during storms or high tides. The salt marsh harvest mouse and other wetland species will benefit from the creation of these ecotones. Next slide. The project will change the loop trail around the Fish and Wildlife Service ponds and bring it closer inland to protect wildlife. The project will also improve trail connections by making a connection to the Bay Trail at Coyote Creek and constructing a pedestrian and bicycle bridge over the railroad where the green dot is on the map. Next slide. Once complete, the project will lead to the tidal restoration of over 2,000 acres on lands owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which are part of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project. An additional 800 plus acres in Pond A18, shown on the right of this map, would also be restored. This pond is currently owned by the City of San Jose's Regional Wastewater Facility. This picture shows that sometimes projects don't always proceed according to plan or as smoothly as we hope. In February 2019, the project partnership agreement that lets the Corps proceed with construction was signed by the project partners. This agreement originally estimated that the total project cost would be $194 million, with the non-federal share at $104 million. In November 2019, the Corps went out to bid for the first phase of construction, which involves building the levee along reaches 1 through 3, shown here in the red circles. The bids came back too high for the Corps to proceed, and the bid had to be canceled. The Corps investigated reasons for the high bids and determined that the cost of fill material was the main driver of these high costs. It's turning out to be a lot more expensive than expected to find material that meets the Corps' geotechnical specs required for levees. After some revisions to the project, the Corps solicited new bids in January of this year for the same reaches. Again, high bids came in, requiring that the Corps review and revise the project cost estimate. As a result, the Corps provided a new estimate in February with an increased total project budget of $545 million, with the total non-federal share of construction costs increasing from $104 million to $265 million. The winning bid was acceptable at this time, and the Corps is currently under contract for construction of the reaches 1 through 3 levee, which should start soon. This is good news, but of course, the bad news is that project costs are much higher and much higher for the non-federal sponsors than we anticipated. While there's sufficient funding to complete the phase of construction coming up, it will be difficult to move into future phases. As a result, we've temporarily put a pause on the design of reaches 4 through 5 on the City of San Jose's Pond A18 side of the project in order to see if there's ways we can reduce costs or raise additional funds. That's all I have for you. Thanks for your attention. And we're excited to see construction beginning soon and doing our best to work through the challenges the project faces. And I don't think we have time for questions now, but I'll be in the Alviso breakout room later. And if you want to ask questions, you can feel free. I'll also put my email in the chat if you have shoreline project related questions.
Well done, Shalini, and welcome to the team. I do see that Neil's on camera. Neil, do you have time to stick around for the breakout room? And if there are questions on the shoreline project, join us in the Alviso breakout room.
Yes.
That would be great. Thanks so much. Judy, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. I have unshared my screen, so you can do yours and give us a quick update on the Creeks Ponds Connection project.
Can everybody see my screen?
Not yet. I don't. Maybe
Kim.
Others do.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. My name is Judy, and I'm the project manager for Calabasas and San Tomas Creek Marsh Connection Project. This project would be first creek to marsh reconnection project in Lower South Bay, San Francisco Bay. We have been awarded combined grant funding of $3.87 million to explore integrating our creek reconnection projects with tidal restoration effort of the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project, thanks to overwhelming support from many of you and organization you're representing, including the Alviso Water Collaborative, Audubon Society, Save the Bay, Sierra Club, Citizens Committee to Complete Refuge, surrounding cities, including Sunnyvale, San Jose, and the county parks recreation, just to name the few. We had well over 20 support letters for each of our Measure AA and Prop 1 grant application. So thank you so much. All right, I'd like to provide some historical context. Very few creeks in the South Bay historically flowed directly to the bay, but rather fanned out into seasonal wetlands and ponds, and Calabasas and San Tomas creeks were no exception. Prior to 1800s, Calabasas Creek dissipated several miles short of the bay in what is now the southern part of Sunnyvale and Santa Clara. San Tomas Creek carried larger perennial flows and most years had the capacity to reach the tidal marshes adjacent to the bay, but lacked a defined connection to the open water. As part of historic wetland losses happened around the San Francisco Bay, starting in the late 1800s, natural creek marsh connection at the project area were removed due to development activities associated with the establishment of agriculture in the area. By early 1900s, tidal marsh in the area had been converted to dike ponds. Natural creeks had been converted to artificial channels, bypassing the dike salt ponds. This led to current state of Calabasas, San Tomas Creeks, Sunnyvale East and West Channel, making many sharp bends and all draining out to Guadalupe Slough. And such inefficient hydraulic conveyance system resulted in excessive sediment accumulation in lower reaches of these creeks and channels. This photo shows our routine maintenance activity we need to conduct to maintain channel capacity for Calabasas, San Tomas creeks. Based on our past maintenance records, we removed over 300,000 cubic yards during the past 20-year period. As you can imagine, significant environmental damages could result from such invasive activities. As part of Healthy Watershed Resilient Baylands funded by EPA, SFEI in partnership with the Valley Water, South Bay Salt Pond led a vision workshop. This SFEI vision graphic captures a conceptual design based on input from design advisory team, and various stakeholders attended the workshop. The goal of this vision workshop was to find nature-based solution to deliver sediment to AA ponds by connecting the creeks to the ponds, thereby reducing environmentally damaging routine maintenance and minimizing the need for trucking the creek sediment to assist South Bay Salt Pond effort of tidal marsh restoration at the AA ponds. Building on the outcome of Vision Workshop, Valley Water conducted a feasibility study for the Calabasas San Tomas Creek Marsh Connection Project. The study identified integrated project option, which combines Valley Water Creek Connection Project with South Bay Salt Pond planned work of multiple breaches into the existing AA pond levees. This option accelerates tidal marsh establishment through increased sediment accretion by taking advantage of both creek sediment supplied through creek connection and bay sediment supplied through the multiple breaches along Guadalupe and Alviso sloughs. Established tidal marsh with potential size over 1,400 acres will provide significant habitat benefit as well as a resilient flood protection to neighboring vulnerable communities. In summary, project has three main objectives of ecological restoration, resilient flood protection, and reduced maintenance. So here's the current project status. We'll be going to Valley Water Board of Directors for approval of grant agreement with San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority and California Department of Fish and Wildlife in December. With approved grant agreement, we'll be able to proceed to planning followed by design effort, which will last about 5 years. We're anticipating project completion by 2028. With grant funding, we're planning to issue RFP for planning, monitoring, and modeling consultant services. We'll be coordinating with our project partner, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Coastal Conservancy, Caltrans, neighboring cities and county, and other stakeholders throughout the RFP process. I'm sure many of you will be involved as part of this coordination effort, and I'm looking forward to working with you. And this concludes my presentation of the Calabasas San Tomas Creek Marsh Connection Project, a nature-based multi-objective project. For the interest of time, you can save your questions and I'll be joining Alviso Complex breakout room and you can ask me your question at that time. Thank you very much.
And there's also an opportunity for dialogue and hearing your comments as well.
And I am just sharing my screen again. We are shortly about to go into the breakout rooms, but I wanted to just take a moment and acknowledge that those are two of the most active ongoing collaborations we have right now. We are, as Matt Brown mentioned, we are actively working with the One Shoreline Flood Control District in San Mateo County on the Bayfront Canal and Atherton Channel project. A major part of the San Francisco Creeks Joint Powers Authority is it kind of in a location that overlaps with our project on different parts of their refuge. And so we are working with them on that. And there are several different sea level rise adaptation projects going on in Sunnyvale and City of Mountain View. There are coastal hazards adaptation efforts going on, and we are working with the Alameda County Flood Control District on different kinds of improvements in Old Alameda Creek and in the Alameda Creek Flood Control Channel. So we don't have time for extensive discussions of all of those today. I'm happy to include those in future meetings and follow up as needed with you all. So what I'd like to do now is begin the transition into our breakout rooms. You know, what we're doing, what we're kind of mentioned all these things already, right? We're getting our science program implemented and ready to go. You know, we're continuing our phase 2 work at the refuge ponds. We're finishing permitting and we're going to get going at construction at Eden Landing in the next year. And we are, you know, continuing to work with these different partner projects. So when we get done with phase 2, as I mentioned before, we'll be at almost 50% of the total area in tidal marsh, and we will figure out what we're going to do after that based on how well all of that works out. This is the contact information for a number of the people you've heard from today. And I will step back here and let Ariel or Julia explain the breakout rooms and how those work. We will have note takers there, but we will not be recording them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Thanks, Dave. And if you can go to the next slide. And then the next slide, there's breakout rooms. So we've got 4 breakout rooms: Eden Landing, the Alviso Ponds in the Refuge, the Ravenswood Ponds in the Refuge, and Science and Monitoring. And these will be choose your own rooms. You can move around among the rooms as you wish. And as Dave said, we've got a bunch of folks there who can dialogue with you all as you wish. Next slide. Okay, so it's pretty basic. Once we start the breakouts, you'll see a box open up with the names of each breakout room, and you'll see join to the right. So you just click on join and you will leave the breakout room. I mean, you'll leave to go to the breakout room. And then anytime you want to leave that breakout room, you'll see a button down at the lower right that says leave breakout room. And there's a red leave meeting button up on top of that. And don't click that unless you want to totally leave the meeting, because you'll leave the meeting. So Julia Van Horn will stay in the plenary for those of you who need some support into moving into your breakout rooms and whatever help you need. And they're going to be about 20 minutes, but we have that sort of informal open house that we're transitioning into. So we're basically here to hear your questions and comments as you wish for the remainder of the time. So, okay, with that, I think we're ready to start moving into breakouts.
Yeah, I think that's right. So yeah, you can hop around room to room, like she said, and I know there's a lot of questions in the chat we didn't get to. I'm sorry about that. Please bring them with you to the breakout rooms, and even if you don't get to them there, hang out and ask me after. We will stay until everybody's questions and concerns have been addressed. So thanks.